take a deep breath, and step with me into the shadows of a history that was never meant to be told. When most people hear the word Brazil, their minds rush to images of carnival parades, somber rhythms, football stadiums roaring with chants, endless beaches glowing under the sun. They think of color, joy, life. But history hides beneath the surface. Beneath the glitter of carnival masks and beneath the sound of drums, there lies another rhythm. The rhythm of chains, the rhythm of suffering, the rhythm of screams swallowed by stone. It begins in the ports. Picture Salvador Bahia in the early 1800s. The city smells of salt and sweat. The bay is crowded with ships arriving not with goods or treasures, but with tragedy. These ships are long and narrow. Their bellies filled not with cargo but with people. Hundreds, sometimes more than 1,000, crammed into dark, airless holds. Bodies stacked like coffins, chains scraping against raw skin. Children crying until their voices give out. When the doors open, sunlight pours in like fire. Many cannot even stand after weeks or months in the darkness of the middle passage. They stumble out onto the docks, half dead, blinded by light, still chained. The sound is unforgettable. Iron clanking against wood, the bark of overseers ordering bodies to move, the cries of mothers reaching for children torn from their arms. The market waits just beyond the docks, a market not of goods, but of flesh. Men are examined like cattle. Women are prodded and handled, some purchased for labor, others for exploitation. Children are separated, their screams piercing the chaos. Brazil imported more enslaved Africans than any other nation in the Americas. More than 4 million lives were taken from Africa and forced into this land. 4 million. It is a number so vast that it almost loses meaning until you realize that behind each number was a face, a name, a story. Now step away from the docks. Walk inland into the plantations. The air thickens with the smell of sugarcane. The sun is merciless, burning the backs of men and women forced to harvest from sunrise to sunset. Overseers ride horses, whips in hand, punishing any who dare slow down. Days blur into nights. Nights blur into years. Life expectancy for an enslaved person on some plantations was measured not in decades, but in single digits. To the masters, there was no need to preserve life. Bodies could be replaced with new ships. And when night falls, there's no freedom. Only the senzala, the slave quarters, cramped huts of mud and wood, packed with dozens, sometimes hundreds. Little air, little food, little hope. Yet in some plantations, even this seemed too much mercy for masters, because hidden under the earth, beneath the mansions, beneath the sugar mills, beneath even the churches, there were other places. Dungeons, underground slave dungeons, carved into stone, sealed with iron doors, thick with rot. These were not places of rest. They were cages. Cages where bodies were chained to stone, where punishment became spectacle, where screams were swallowed by the earth. The masters called them calabucos, but the word calabuco softens the truth. These were not mere cells. They were tombs for the living. Walk with me down the stone steps. The air grows colder, but heavier. The smell is suffocating. Rot, mold, human waste. Your hand brushes the wall and comes away damp. The walls drip. The ground is uneven, covered in straw that long ago turned to black dust. Iron rings are bolted into the stone. Chains dangle from them, rusted but unbroken. In some dungeon still standing today, those chains remain fixed, as if waiting for wrists that will never return. Imagine being thrown here after working all day in the sun, your body already broken, your skin already bleeding, and now darkness. Darkness, so complete you cannot see your own hands. The only sounds are breathing, sobbing, coughing. Somewhere in the corner, someone whispers a prayer. Somewhere else, someone sings a fragment of a song from Africa, almost inaudible, almost gone. Some are kept for hours, others for days. Some never came out alive. These were not only places of confinement, they were places of punishment, places of fear. A man suspected of plotting revolt could be chained here for weeks, his body wasting, his mind collapsing. A woman accused of defiance might be left in silence, until her voice was gone. The dungeon was not just stone and iron, it was psychological. It was designed to make human beings believe they were less than human. But here's the truth, it never fully worked, because memory does not die in darkness. Songs hummed under the breath carried the weight of whole nations. Stories whispered in the dark preserved the idea that freedom had once been real and could be real again. Even in the dungeon, dreams survived. Now let me take you to the world above these dungeons. Because while the enslaved suffocated underground, the masters lived above in splendor, mansions with wide verandas, churches with gilded altars, streets paved with stone. Tourists who visit Brazil today walk those same streets, look at those same churches, and take photos of the beauty. Few realize that beneath their feet, beneath those walls, were hidden chambers where human beings were treated worse than animals. And this is where we begin to see the greatest contradiction of Brazilian slavery: beauty above, horror below. The masters prayed in church while men and women were chained in the earth beneath. They hosted dances while screams echoed below. The dungeon was not just a place. It was a symbol of how far human cruelty will go to preserve power. Imagine yourself there. Close your eyes. Smell the mold, the sweat, the blood. Feel the walls narrowing around you. Hear the echo of chains scraping stone. Now ask yourself, how long could you survive before breaking? The enslaved endured not just for days, not just for years, but for centuries. And still they resisted. Resistance took many forms. Songs, stories, small acts of sabotage, escapes, revolts. But the dungeon was the ultimate attempt to kill resistance. And still it failed. Because even in silence, freedom spoke. Even in darkness, hope glowed. And today, when we uncover these forgotten slave dungeons, we uncover not only stone, but memory. Memory that was buried but never destroyed. This is not a ghost story. This is history, and history demands to be told. Now, let us walk deeper into the heart of the ingenio, the sugar mill. The plantation was not only a field, it was a machine that devoured human lives and spat out sugar, white gold for European markets. At dawn, the enslaved were forced into fields, bare feet sinking into wet soil, backs bent for hours, hands slicing cane until they bled. Overseers rode among them on horseback, whips in hand, their eyes sharp, their whips sharper. Work did not end with the harvest. The cane had to be carried to the mill. Enslaved men lifted stalks heavy as their own bodies, marched them to the grinding machines. The sound of gears turning, crushing cane, filled the air with mechanical growl. The mills did not rest. Neither did the enslaved. Inside the mill house, the air was unbearable, thick with smoke from boiling cauldrons, sticky with sugar, hot enough to blister skin. Accidents were constant, hands crushed in gears, bodies scalded by boiling syrup. A scream could be heard, then silence, then work continued. And above it all, the masters lived in luxury. Their houses sat high on the hill, painted white, decorated with imported tiles, filled with European furniture. From their verandas, they looked down on the fields and the mill, their empire of suffering disguised as progress. But beneath it all, literally beneath, another system existed, the underground dungeons. Why build them? Why carve stone chambers under the earth when the senzalas above already confined enslaved? The answer lies in fear. The masters feared rebellion more than anything. They had seen what happened in Haiti. They knew their wealth depended on keeping thousands of men and women broken, silent, submissive. And so, the dungeon became their secret weapon. It was not enough to whip. It was not enough to starve. They needed to terrify, to make examples, to bury resistance before it could breathe. The dungeon was punishment, but also performance. An enslaved man accused of plotting revolt would be dragged down stone steps in chains. Others would be forced to hear his screams from above. The dungeon was a warning. This is what happens to those who dare to dream. But it was more than punishment. It was also storage, human storage. When ships arrived with new captives, not all could be housed at once. Some were locked underground until buyers came. Imagine it. freshly torn from Africa after weeks in the belly of a ship, only to be thrust into the earth itself, into darkness deeper than the ocean. The dungeon was also a place of disappearance. Those who resisted, those who defied, those who fought back, many entered and never returned. The dungeon was punishment, but it was also theater. The enslaved above knew what was happening below, even if they could not see. The cries seeped through stone, a warning carved in sound. But the dungeon was also a place of storage. Ships brought hundreds at once. Not all could be sold immediately. Not all could be housed above. So some were locked underground, stacked in chambers barely big enough to breathe. Fresh from the horrors of the Middle Passage, they found themselves thrust into new darkness. From ship's hold to Earth's belly, chains never left their skin. The dungeon also served another purpose: disappearance. Those who entered sometimes never returned. A rebellious woman, a man who refused to work, a child who struck back. Their absence sent a message stronger than any whip. Resistance means vanishing. What makes these dungeons even more grotesque is their location. Some were built under the very mansions where masters dined. While music played above, screams echoed below. Some were beneath mills, where sugar was refined for European markets. Others were beneath churches. Yes, churches. Imagine kneeling in prayer above ground, while beneath your feet, men and women were chained in darkness. Imagine priests blessing the sugar harvest, while that same sugar was paid for in flesh. The contradiction is unbearable, and yet it was real. Tourists in Salvador, Recife, or Rio de Janeiro walk past colonial churches every day. Many marvel at the architecture, at the gilded altars, at the painted ceilings. Few realize that beneath some of these buildings, history carved out chambers of silence, places where no prayer reached. But here's the part the masters never understood. The dungeon was not the end of humanity. Yes, it was terror. Yes, it was death. But even here, memory survived. Picture a dark chamber, lit only by a single candle. Maybe not even that. Dozens of bodies packed against a stone. The air so thick with moisture you could barely breathe. And yet, listen closely. A song, low at first, almost a hum, then joined by another voice, then another. A rhythm takes shape, a rhythm from Africa, carried across oceans, carried into chains, carried into the dungeon itself. Or imagine whispers, stories told in fragments, of kings and queens across the sea, of ancestors who walk with the living, of gods who promised freedom, words that defied silence. Even here in the earth, hope glowed, small, fragile, but unbroken. The dungeon was meant to erase. Instead, it preserved in whispers, in songs, in memories that refuse to die. And this is where the horror becomes truth. The dungeon was not only a tool of oppression, it became a seed of resistance. Because when you strip everything away, light, air, freedom, and people still cling to memory, you have not broken them. You have only taught them how to endure. The masters could never understand that, but history remembers. Inside the dungeon, torture, secrets, revolt. Step with me into the dungeon itself. Not as a historian, not as a tourist, but as someone forced inside. The iron door shuts. Darkness swallows everything. The smell is the first thing you notice. Rot, mold, human waste, the metallic sting of blood. The floor is damp. Your bare feet sink into mud mixed with straw. Something moves, rats, insects. Chains clink as bodies shift in the dark. You reach out a hand. Your fingers touch cold stone. You move again. This time, your hand grazes iron, and you realize it is a shackle fixed to the wall. It rattles, though no one is wearing it now. But once, someone did. And then, the sound of breath. Dozens of people in the same space. Some coughing, some crying, some whispering prayers. This is not a cell. This is a tomb for the living. The dungeon was not only a place of confinement, it was a theater of cruelty. Whippings were common above ground, but below, punishments took different forms. Some were chained by the neck to iron rings, forced to squat in the same position for hours, sometimes days. Muscles cramped, blood circulation slowed, until their legs no longer obeyed. Others were shackled by the wrists and left hanging, toes barely touching ground, shoulders tearing from their sockets. Food was withheld, water too. Hunger gnawed not only at the body but at the mind. Some resorted to chewing straw, licking walls for moisture, catching rats for survival. Beatings were delivered with rods, clubs, anything at hand. The darkness made it worse. You never saw the blow coming. You only felt it. And then, the psychological torture. Some were left alone in total darkness for days. No sound but their own heartbeat. Isolation broke minds faster than chains broke bodies. People whispered to ghosts, spoke to ancestors, cried out to gods. Some returned to the light mad, muttering forever. The dungeon was also a place of disappearance. Official records rarely mention this. Masters did not advertise their cruelties, but oral histories tell us many who entered never returned. Bodies were sometimes buried near the plantations, shallow graves hidden under sugarcane fields. Others were thrown into rivers at night, weighted with stones. Some chambers themselves may have doubled as burial pits, sealed after too many died within. There are stories of experiments too. Overseers testing endurance. How long can a man live without food? How long until he breaks in silence? The dungeon was not only a tool of punishment, but control through terror. And yet, secrets leak. Even stone cannot contain memory. Travelers wrote of screams at night near the mills. Priests mentioned confessions of cruelty whispered in shame. Descendants tell of families who knew their ancestors vanished into the ground. Every silence has an echo, but the dungeon was not only a place of death, it was also a place of defiance. Imagine voices singing softly in the dark. At first one, then another, until the chamber hums with rhythm. Songs in Yoruba, Kikongo, Mandinka, African tongues carried across oceans, surviving chains. Imagine hands tracing symbols into the dirt, spiritual marks, prayers to Orixas, god of thunder and freedom. Imagine whispered plans, escape routes, signals, conspiracies. Even here, even in chains, resistance survived. Some revolts began with whispers in these very chambers. A word passed in secret. Soon, a look exchanged. We are ready. The masters thought they had buried rebellion. Instead, they fed it, but survival came at a cost. Many left the dungeon broken. Minds shattered by isolation, by hunger, by endless screams. Some spoke to shadows, mistaking them for ancestors. Some laughed uncontrollably, a hollow sound that frightened others. Children who saw their parents dragged underground carried nightmares for life. Whole communities bore the trauma. The dungeon scarred not only individuals but generations. And yet, even madness could be resistance. To refuse sanity in an insane system was its own defiance. To cling to visions of ancestors, even hallucinated, was a way of saying, we are not alone. Picture one night, a group of enslaved men and women are locked underground after refusing work. Their bodies are weak, their stomachs empty, but one man whispers a story of Haiti. Another recalls a prophecy from Africa that chains would one day break. They join hands in the dark. They promise each other, if we survive, we will fight. That night, in the dungeon, a revolt is born. The masters could never hear it, but history did. The dungeon was hell on earth, a place of torture, disappearance, madness, a scar carved into stone and into memory. But it was also proof that slavery was not passive, proof that even in the deepest silence, voices spoke. Proof that resistance cannot be buried forever. Every dungeon is a contradiction, built to kill hope, yet remember today as evidence of hope's survival. When you walk in Brazil and see old stone steps leading downward, blocked doors, sealed chambers, remember, these were not just rooms. They were battlegrounds of spirit, and the echoes you feel there are not only of suffering, they are defiance. Because even in the dungeon, freedom refused to die. Rebellion was the master's greatest nightmare. The dungeon existed to prevent it, but no dungeon, no whip, no chain could erase the will to resist. And resist they did, in whispers, in escapes, in revolts. And when revolt came, the consequences were catastrophic. Imagine a plantation at night. The overseers sleep in their houses. The masters dine in their mansions. But in the senzalas, whispers grow into chants. A torch is lit. A cane field catches fire. The revolt begins. Enslaved men and women rise, some with machetes, others with farm tools sharpened into weapons. The air fills with shouts, with firelight, with the sound of chains breaking. But the masters are ready. They have militias, soldiers, neighbors armed with rifles. Within hours, the rebellion meets bullets. Blood runs through the cane fields. Flames consume houses. Bodies are left as warnings. Rebellions in Brazil were often met with massacres of unimaginable scale. In 1835, the male revolt in Salvador saw hundreds of enslaved and freed Africans rise up, inspired by Islam and memories of Africa. They fought bravely through the streets, carrying swords and banners. But within hours, militias crushed them. Dozens were executed. Hundreds were imprisoned. Some were deported back to Africa. In Palmares, a community of runaway slaves that resisted for nearly a century, the Portuguese finally sent thousands of soldiers. The Colombo was destroyed in blood. Survivors were hunted, killed, displayed as trophies. Every act of resistance was drowned in violence. And always, the masters made sure to make examples. After revolts, the authorities staged trials. But these were not courts of justice. They were theaters of control. A man accused of leading a revolt was paraded before judges. Evidence was often fabricated. Witnesses were coerced. The verdict was predetermined. Punishments were public. Executions were staged in city squares. Whippings carried out before crowds. Heads of rebels displayed on poles at plantation entrances. These were not just punishments. They were performances designed to terrify, to remind every enslaved person watching, this is your fate if you resist. The state sanctioned it. The church often blessed it. Governors authorized massacres. Priests reminded slaves of obedience, quoting scripture twisted into chains. The system was complete. Economics, politics, religion, all aligned to crush revolt. But violence was not enough. Masters knew that blood fades, but memory remains. So they sought to erase memory itself. Official records minimized revolts, calling them disturbances. Newspapers described rebels as savages, fanatics, criminals, rarely as fighters for freedom. Schools ignored these stories. Children were taught of the glory of sugar, of the wealth of the colony, of the beauty of churches, never the chains beneath them. Even today, many Brazilians grow up knowing little about these revolts. The memory was buried, the archives silent. But silence itself speaks. For enslaved communities, the consequences were deeper than physical punishment. They carried trauma across generations. A grandmother whispered to her grandchildren about the man who vanished into the dungeon. A mother sang lullabies that masked hidden stories of resistance. Families remembered, even when the state erased. This is how memory survived, in song, in prayer, in legend, and yet trauma lingered. Communities carried the scars of massacres, of disappearances, of public humiliations. The dungeon did not only bury individuals, it buried voices, but their echo remained. The consequences of revolt were brutal: massacres, trials, silencing. But in those consequences lies proof. Proof that resistance never stopped. Proof that even under the harshest repression, freedom was desired, dreamed, fought for. And when you look at Brazilian history, you realize, if slavery had truly been accepted in silence, there would have been no need for such violence, no need for dungeons, no need for massacres. The very brutality of the system proves its fragility. So when you walk through Salvador or Rio or Recife today, and you see the beauty of colonial architecture, remember, these walls were built not only with stone and sugar, but with silence. The massacres, the trials, the erasures, they were all attempts to control memory. But memory has a way of surviving. It lingers in whispers, in songs, in ruins, in sealed doors. And tonight, by telling this story, we break the silence they tried so hard to build. Because history is not only what is written in books, it is also what was torn out. And our duty is to put it back. Take one last walk with me, not through the cane fields, not through the mills, not into the dungeon. Walk with me through the present. The plantations may be gone, the mills silent, the mansions turned into museums, but the ghosts remain. They walk beneath the streets of Salvador. They linger in the ruins of Bahia. They rest in unmarked graves across Brazil. You may not see them at first, but if you listen, if you truly listen, you will hear them. The scrape of chains in silence, the whisper of songs half remembered, the breath of millions who were forced underground. History is never really buried. The masters tried to erase memory. They destroyed records. They silenced voices. They turned dungeons into storage rooms, then sealed them forever. But silence is fragile. Every sealed door begs a question. Why? Every forgotten chamber demands to be remembered. And when archaeologists uncover rusted chains, when descendants tell their stories, when ruins are explored, silence cracks open. The truth seeps through. The dungeon becomes not only a place of horror, but a place of witness. It tells us we were here, we suffered, we resisted. Slavery may have ended in 1888 in Brazil, the last country in the Americas to abolish it, but its echoes remain. Walk through Brazil today, and you see them, in the favelas rising on hillsides, in the inequality that shapes every street, in the racism that lingers in everyday life. The dungeon may no longer hold bodies, but its shadow holds society, because when a system lasts for centuries, its scars do not disappear overnight. They are passed down in memory, in trauma, in silence. The dungeon lives on not in stone, but in the structures of inequality we still see today. So what is the lesson of these forgotten dungeons? That cruelty can be hidden under beauty. That silence can be louder than screams. That resistance can survive even in the deepest dark. And perhaps most of all, that history is not only what is written in books, it is what is erased. And our duty is to uncover it. Now, I want to speak not just about Brazil, not just about history, but to you, imagine standing above one of these sealed chambers. Imagine knowing that beneath your feet, people once lived in darkness, chained to stone. Imagine their voices rising, faint but determined. Do not forget us. That is what history is asking of you. To remember, to carry memory forward, to break the silence. Because if we do not, the silence wins. The dungeon wins. If this story shook you, if it opened your eyes to a history rarely told, do not let it be silenced again. Share it, talk about it, keep the memory alive. And if you want to hear more hidden histories, stories erased, stories buried, stories forgotten but not gone, subscribe. Subscribe for Hidden History, because there are more doors to open, more silences to break, more ghosts to honor. The dungeon is gone, the chains rust, the walls crumble, but memory does not fade. The enslaved who entered those dungeons did not vanish. They live in every story told, in every song remembered, in every act of resistance that followed. They live in us, and as long as we remember, the silence can never return. So tonight, as we close this story, let us leave with one truth. Even in the deepest dark, freedom survives.